Welcome, Chatham, to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees meeting of January 17, 2024. Before I read all this stuff that I have to read, I just want to say that this is a meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Board because we wanted to be here and hear the presentation in person and hear the comments and public commentary at the end of it. Again, in person, we can't do that unless there's a meeting. So this is a meeting, but that's the only reason it's a meeting. This is a hybrid meeting that is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please notify the chair. Hearing none. Pursuant to Governor Healy's March 29, 2023 signing of the Acts of 2023, extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until March 31, 2025. This meeting of the Chatham Affordable Housing Trust Board of Trustees is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 729-505-204#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. We have only one agenda item, which is the third Community Housing Forum, which is a presentation of conceptual, affordable, attainable housing development scenarios for 2 town-owned properties. I will simply say by way of introduction, we will have a full comment period at the end of the presentation for questions, comments, whatever anybody would like to contribute to the meeting. For those people who are online who also will be included in that offer of public comment, I'd like to ask that you please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras until such time as you are recognized by the meeting. So with that, let me turn it over to Gloria McPherson, who will introduce our guests and give you a little more detail on what you're going to see.
Mike, do you need to call a roll?
I do. Thank you. I always do that, and Shireen always fixes me up to get it straight. We do need to call the roll here. So, Trustee Schneerperson. Yep.
Schneeberger, here.
Schneerberger. Sorry, I'm flustered now. You're present. I'm present. Mike Schell is present. Go ahead.
Bruce Bean is present.
Yeah.
Shireen Davis, present.
Carolyn McClellan's present.
David Oppenheim's present.
And Rick Levitt is present.
Thank you. And that way we introduced ourselves as well. So go ahead, Gloria. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the third and final Community Housing Forum. We're here tonight to listen to what the community has to say about some conceptual design scenarios for 2 properties that were purchased by the town for the express purpose of the creation of affordable and or attainable housing. One of the properties on Meeting House Road was formerly the Fall River Diocese property, and that consists of approximately 3.5 acres. And the other property on Main Street, the former Buckley property, consists of approximately 3 acres. Originally, the town had purchased 2.5 acres, and we are just going to close on the final ½ acre in 2 days on Friday. The plans that will be presented tonight are conceptual in nature. They represent a couple different ways that these properties can be developed among a myriad of ways. It's not the definitive plan for this. They could be developed like I said, in many ways, a large part of the way that those properties are going to be developed are not so much the plans that we're going to be looking at here per se, but also what we write in our request for proposals and how we set parameters for how we want the sites to develop it. These conceptual plans are really in a way to kind of spur discussion and get a sense of community input and preferences. One of the clear requirements for these projects, though, is that the housing that we create is going to be year-round. There will be no votes taken tonight, but what is discussed along with other information that was gathered and reviewed over the course of this year-long engagement process will help inform the RFPs for the development of the properties. The final plans are going to be plans that are ultimately selected by proposals that are submitted by developers. So that's, maybe 6-8 months, a year down the road before we see the final plans. And with that, I think I will pass it on to our consultants. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I am wondering if there's anything I need to do to get, okay, there we go, wonderful, thank you. Gloria, thank you for introducing us. My name is Alexis Lanzolata. I'm from Barrett Planning Group, and I'm here with Peter Flinker from Dodson and Flinker. And we have been working with the town for some time now on this process, and I'm going to start off by just going over what we will discuss tonight. I'm going to begin with talking about just kind of the project background, why we're here, what led us to this evening. And for some of you, I see some familiar faces here, so some of this might be repeat information for you, but for others who are just joining us for the first time in this process tonight, we just want to make sure you understand all of the steps that led up to this evening. Then we're going to be reviewing some of the parameters that have gone into the decision-making process so far. And as Gloria mentioned, this is a longer-term process. What we're going to be sharing with you tonight is not any sort of definitive plan for either site. Because that's, as you'll see in kind of a timeline of how this process will unfold, there are many more subsequent steps to follow. And then I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who will go over some of the concepts that have been developed with guidance from staff, the community, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. And then we will defer to the trust to kickstart a open comment discussion, as Mr. Chair alluded to. So the project background. As I mentioned, I'm Alexis Lanzolata, Barrett Planning Group. My colleague Judy Barrett is on Zoom with us this evening. She's also been working with us alongside this project. And we have with us Peter Flinker. And so I wanted to go over the project schedule leading up to this. So we started the public-facing portion of this engagement in December of 2022, so a little over a year ago, with the first community meeting. Now, prior to that, the consultant team and staff had done preliminary homework. We'd done site visits and just kind of getting an understanding of what was possible on each site in terms of development constraints and things like that. And so that first community meeting was just very much introducing the process to the community. Then we had a second community meeting a couple of months later to actually look at some ideas for the site. Then we launched a visual preference survey for a few weeks to get some input both on concepts but also kind of general preferences in terms of design and density and building preferences and things like that. Then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee had a series of discussion meetings over several months, and I'll kind of go over what was discussed at those meetings later in this presentation. And then that brings us here this evening. And as Gloria mentioned, following this, there's a longer-term development process that will commence. So there are no, hard and fast decisions at this point. Why are we here? So in fall of 2020, the town began issuing RFPs for the acquisition of real property to be used for affordable and attainable housing. So this RFP has been and will continue to be reissued periodically. In fact, it was recently reissued, and I believe it closes in, I think, the middle of February. So this RFP is currently, again, open. But essentially, the town is, and the Affordable Housing Trust, were seeking proposals for the purchase of a parcel of land or parcels of land within the town suitable for the construction or an existing building suitable for renovation for use as a mix of affordable and attainable housing. And then, so through this process, the town purchased 2 properties. One was Main Street property, formerly owned by the Buckley family. And then the other properties on Meeting House Road, formerly owned by the Fall River Diocese. So the town is now concluding a visioning and community engagement process to look at affordable and attainable housing development for both parcels. And I'm using that term affordable and attainable, and I'll talk about what that means. The method of purchase for both sites kind of specifies what the affordability thresholds can be for each site, so we will talk about that. One thing I want to point out, if you look at that locus map, firstly, just again, I just want to reiterate this. This visioning process is the beginning of a longer-term process that can take several years, from the issuance of an RFP to the permitting process to construction and all of that. So it's really just the beginning. But I do want to direct your attention to that locus map, the Main Street property in particular. So you will notice if you attended the first two community meetings, the shape of that parcel was different. And as Gloria mentioned, the town in the next couple of days is expected to close on acquiring that front portion, making that a more kind of a shape that's easier to work with. So that I'll be talking about that process as well. So what will long-term implementation look like? So this is going to be a longer-term timeline, but right now, so we're at this visioning process for both sites, and we worked on conceptual development scenarios for consideration. So the next process that's going to unfold will likely focus on each site individually. So after the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee kind of considers the concepts presented, town staff will develop and issue an RFP for site development and ultimately will select a preferred developer based on the responses received. So one of the main reasons we wanted to conduct this engagement process was so that the town would have kind of parameters, guiding parameters in that request for proposals for development to be able to really weigh in on what is important to the community. Within kind of the constraints of development feasibility and what can be done with property acquired by the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So then, once a developer is selected, the town and the developer would develop a land disposition agreement, and that really kind of constrains what can be done on the property. It's essentially a contract at that point. And then the developer would seek the necessary permits from the town. This is, again, a longer-term process. The developer would then apply for and receive funding, most likely from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which is the state's housing office. It was, up until very recently, known as DHCD, or the Department of Housing and Community Development. Then construction would begin, and ultimately lottery tenant selection and lease-up would occur. So that is the very long-term timeline. And I just want to point out that what we are discussing tonight, there are other points where the site design may evolve, and it's not going to, dramatically change from what guidance the town agrees to with the developer. But there may be changes. For example, the town can put out an RFP, and then developers may say, you know what, not all of that, we can't do all of that, but maybe we could do X, Y, Z. So the developers may come back and say, this is actually a little more feasible for us. Since we started this project, construction costs have exponentially risen, which is one thing that we heard from developers during this process. So, we may get feedback that says what a developer can and cannot do. So there might be some shifts at that point. When the developer then goes to the ZBA for the comprehensive permit process, there's also going to be kind of a back and forth about what the site design will ultimately be. And then when the developer goes to seek funding from the state may come back and say, we really want you to try to get the cost per unit down, or because the funding competitive process is, it's very competitive. So in order to get those funds from the state may issue some guidance back to the developer. So those are some points where the site design may evolve. And so we just wanted to point that out. I'm going to give a little bit of background about the Main Street property. So in June of 2021, town meeting authorized the purchase of the Main Street property for affordable and attainable housing. And you can see both terms are used there. So it's just over $1.3 million. At the time, 50% free cash and 50% from Affordable Housing Trust funds. So then, in April 2022, the planning board approved an approval not required plan to separate out the front portion and merge a rear parcel to create kind of this shape that you see here. So the final size at that time was about 2.5 acres, and then the town closed on the sale in November of 2022. So shortly before we began the community engagement process. Most recently, the town was given the opportunity to acquire that, so you can see that front portion, to acquire that, and the town is scheduled to close on that purchase later this week for just over $700,000, also purchased with Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So the new final size is plus or minus 3 acres with 2 curb cuts. So because of the funding sources, this property will tentatively have at least 70% affordable units that meet Affordable Housing Trust Fund guidelines and up to 30% attainable units. And so one of the things that when the town sought feedback from the development community, the town was asking about kind of how challenging that may be to do that mix. And they did get responses that it is possible, and we'll kind of talk about that when we talk about that feedback from the developers. So that's the history of the Main Street property. For the Meeting House Road property, this was entirely purchased with Affordable Housing Trust funds. And so this, in May 2022, is when this property was purchased. And so the town closed several months later in October 2022 for slightly less than the original offer. So this property will have 100% affordable units because it was entirely purchased with Affordable Housing Trust funds. I want to go over the decision-making process a little bit, and so I'm going to direct your attention back to that project schedule. As I mentioned, we had 2 community meetings, and then we conducted a visual preference survey, and from that point, it really shifted over to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee to kind of weigh that input and other input that I'll be discussing, and to kind of give guidance to Dodson and Flinker to figure out what concepts might inform the development of a request for proposals for the development of each site. So just to give a little background about what each of those components included. For those of you who were at those first 2 community meetings, you may remember the first meeting, we actually didn't have any concepts. We just reviewed the project process and background, and we discussed the existing conditions of each site. So we went over topography, we went over zoning, the surrounding land uses and that sort of thing. And then we just kind of solicited some feedback about each site, what might make sense, rental versus ownership, building types, things like that. And then in February, so between those 2 meetings, town staff, us at Barrett, Dodson and Flinker, we met and discussed what might make sense for a range of concepts for each site to bring to that community meeting to solicit response. And so in February, we again reviewed that project background. A big component of that meeting was talking about project feasibility and finance considerations to kind of get an understanding of, what the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities would be likely to support with funding in order to, provide that subsidy for a developer to be able to offer those affordable units. So then Dodson and Flinker presented concepts for each site. And then, so again, those concepts were developed with staff guidance to show a range of housing options and densities for both sites. From there, we conducted a visual preference survey that lasted for several weeks. There were over 875 responses, which was wonderful to get that level of feedback. The visual preference survey was broken into a few sections, one of which was the participants were given the opportunity to rate the concepts that were presented at that meeting. And so there were, I believe, 4 concepts for the Main Street site and then 5 for the Meeting House Road site, and participants were asked to rank up to 5 stars. And then there were also general visual preference questions. So it was interesting because there was kind of a split there for the concepts. When participants were asked to rate the concepts, townhouses were the preferred. They had the most 4- and 5-star ratings. Apartments and single-family cottages, interestingly, for both sites, for the concepts, were both rated relatively the same and not nearly as favorably as townhouses. So that was interesting because then when we asked the general visual preference questions, the participants tended to favor lower density options like cottages and townhouses and things like that. So when looking at the sites, we got a little bit of different answer than when looking at visual preference questions from housing developments from other communities. So then we wanted to take all this information to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. And so in April, we met with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee and we discussed the community forums and we discussed the survey results. We also discussed again that project feasibility and finance considerations. And then it was at that point that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee decided to issue what's called a request for information. So with all that community feedback and with that understanding of, you know, this may sound nice to have XYZ on the site, is it financially feasible? The trust felt they needed more information, and so they asked staff to develop a request for information, or an RFI, which was issued for response from the development community. I'll review that in just a moment. And then you can see there were other meetings that I'll talk about. But I do want to talk about that RFI. So it was issued in May, and it was open for, it looks like, a couple of months. And so there were 4 responses received from 5 organizations during that time, and then staff also conducted site visits with interested developers. The questions in the RFI focused on things like project phasing. Would it make sense to issue this as one RFP? If we did separate, what would it look like in terms of timing? How long would this take? Would you want to break it down? There were also questions about the financing strategies for each site based on the affordability requirements of the purchase source. And that is really important because the developer really has to kind of adhere to that understanding that one of the properties was purchased entirely with Affordable Housing Trust funds. So those units really all need to be affordable. And the other site was initially purchased 50-50 with Affordable Housing Trust funds, but since it's shifted more to about 70-30. So the RFI was asking developers, you know, with that consideration, what sorts of financing methodologies would you use to make that project happen? The questions also focused on income limits, rental versus ownership, housing types. And so with that feedback, I think one of the things that was really a driving force in the conversations was understanding the financing strategy for each site, understanding the options that are available for subsidy sources from federal government, state, from the county, local subsidy sources, understanding kind of the strings attached to all of those sources and how that informs what can be built on each site. So then, in August, staff reviewed those RFI responses with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. And then in September, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee provided guidance for Dodson and Flinker with some parameters for the development concepts. And then earlier this month, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee met to review the conceptual plans that you'll be seeing this evening. So you can see there's no decision really making in this process as of yet. This is really just kind of getting information, informing the development of these concepts that we wanted to share with you. So in terms of those considerations for decision making, because as you can understand, a lot went into this. So project financing and feasibility. Every financing source, and if you missed the second community meeting, the slides for that really go into a lot of detail about the different subsidy sources that are available and kind of how that may limit or inform a project. So that is a big consideration. Leveraging the town's investment for the purchase. The town spent a lot of money on this. So is the priority going to be the number of units? Is the priority going to be affordability levels? What is the priority in terms of how to best use that, significant amount of town dollars? Also, the trust discussed community housing needs, including the need for rental, which your housing production plan identifies as really the top need as opposed to ownership. It also does identify a need for ownership, but identifies a priority need for rental opportunities. That need is restated in the Affordable Housing Trust funding priorities, which lean on that housing production plan. And then also a strong need identified for one-bedroom units, in part based upon the very competitive lottery selection process from other affordable housing projects where typically it's the one-bedroom units that just have, a disproportionate very large amount of applicants trying to get a very limited number of units. So that is important because that also then kind of informs the building type. if you need to prioritize one-bedroom units, what sorts of buildings can you really do that in? Community feedback from the discussions at the community meetings, from that visual preference survey, developer feedback from the RFI, and then also the acquisition of that front parcel, parcel on Main Street, which is allowing for, a slightly higher level of units now. That's an additional half acre on that parcel. So it provides greater access and more opportunity for additional units. So those are some of the kind of considerations that I think guided the decision-making process thus far for the development of these concepts. And, of course, after Peter presents the concepts, we will be happy to take your questions on any of this process as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Peter.
Well, thanks. Great to be here tonight. So we're going to go first the Main Street property and then the Meeting House Road property. A lot of you are familiar with where the site is. This is an aerial photograph taken at a slight angle from a helicopter, but it basically shows the Main Street property as it exists today with the purchase of that additional half-acre parcel. So it's a nice big square with lots of room for access along Main Street. And it's surrounded, as you know, from a mix of different uses, old hotels, commercial uses, and residential uses, all of which are going to affect the design. So this is both of the parcels as they were originally surveyed in 2 lots. Now they've been combined into 1 lot. And this is looking from the Main Street side. So you see there's the old hotel on the one side. Well, I guess there's hotels and commercial properties on both sides, and then residential. Preserve as much vegetation on the site and the buffers around the site as possible to have safe access points, to respect the neighbors and the neighborhood as much as possible, and really make it something that fits in. So this is what we call an orthophoto map. So this is a scale drawing, seeing the site with the red boundary there, about 2.95 acres. And then these are some of the earlier studies that we did last year, before there was the additional parcel. And one of the things which you'll notice is that there's not as much room for access, which really made it hard to do a loop road access. It basically had to be a single entrance. And so we sort of decided to configure that along one side of the property that would open up the rest of the property for either townhouse development or cottages or apartments, with varying results in terms of the ability to create open space within the property and surrounding the property, and how the buildings would relate to the property and to the surroundings. One of the things we heard as feedback is people were a little nervous about having all the parking in one place. Some people might be close to their apartment with their car. Others would have to walk quite a long distance. So as we've been moving forward, we've been thinking, how can we have the benefit of a single sort of coherent pedestrian area so that kids can run around and you don't have to be dodging cars, but also get cars relatively close to the units. So our current process is focused on this larger site, 2.95 acres, that includes the extra parcel, which you'll see really opens up some additional possibilities, both more units, but a more rational kind of circulation system. So this is sort of the first plan I want to show you tonight. This is what we're calling townhouses and stacked flats. And I'll explain that a little bit more with some examples in a minute. But basically, townhouses are units that share a wall with another unit, the traditional kind of row house. So you have your door in the front, and at the back you might have a deck, but on either side of you, you might have an attached unit. And stacked flats is literally apartments that are stacked on top of each other, with a shared staircase to one side, typically. Both of those are becoming more common within the sort of range of building types that are being built, because they serve as kind of a middle ground between the large shoebox apartments that a lot of developers tend to build next to the interstate, and then the single-family homes. And now that towns are like yours are opening up the possibility for more diverse housing. The townhouses and these stacked flats and others are really making it more possible to build something that fits in a little bit better, because it might look like a single-family house, but it has 2 units, or it might look like a big a big single-family house, but it has multiple apartments stacked up. So in this scenario, we have 50 homes. There's a loop road around the site. If you can follow my cursor, there's an entrance on either end, and it loops all the way around. And there's parking on the inside facing what becomes a continuous sort of pedestrian space, right, with sidewalks leading to the front doors of the units. And in the front, facing Main Street, these would be townhouses, so essentially single units, story and a half high probably, could be up to 2 stories, but sharing an end wall, but with a variety of sort of contexts there, where some of them might be 3 units, some of them might be 4 or 5 units, and so on. And in the back, we're putting these larger sort of 2.5-story stacked flat structures, a little bit bigger, but by putting them away from the road and toward the back of the property, it reduces their visual impact. So we end up with 50 homes, 50 units in townhouse structures, or 15 rather, and 45 in, what do we have there, 5 9-unit structures. And then we've been, I think originally we're looking at 2 spaces per unit. I think through a lot of discussion and research, we've settled on having 1.5 spaces per unit, with basically basing it on 1 space for each bedroom. So if this is going to be 50% 1-bedroom units, 50% 2- and 3-bedroom units, essentially we're using an average of 1.5 space per unit. So for 50 units, it's 75 parking spaces. So at 2.95 acres, that's about 17 units an acre, which is a nice density in terms of getting the value that you've spent to purchase this property back in terms of affordability. So what are some of these different unit types? These are townhouses, but what you notice that these are not like Boston townhouses, they're more country townhouses. And again, this is something we're seeing more and more commonly, whether it's a kind of a cluster of more of estate style there in the upper left, or farmhouse styles. A lot of developers are really coming up with some interesting ideas of making something that looks like an extended farmhouse or an estate building, but that, when you look closely, is cut up into a number of different buildings, or a number of different homes, each with its own entrance. And then these are sort of stacked flat units. So what you'll see here, this is an example from Hyannis, but basically they're 3 apartments. Whoops. Sorry about that. So this is a floor plan of each floor. So there's 1 apartment on one side, and then the other side there's another apartment and a staircase connecting them. And so what you have is 3 levels of apartments, pretty much identical, sharing a staircase. But what it ends up looking like is more of a large single-family home, or in this case, there's another example of an apartment block. But the advantage of the stacked flats is that they're only 1 unit wide or 1 unit deep. So they basically fit the kind of scale and proportions of a traditional tall single-family house. This is, again, that example, the first example I was showing you. So one of the sort of principles that we would recommend for the RFP is to have a mix of units, and this is something that I think the committee supported. So especially up toward the more visible part of the property, you have smaller structures with maybe, as shown here, 3 and 4 and 5 unit structures, and then put the larger buildings with more units in the back. So this is the second alternative, which is an additional 10 homes, which takes advantage of that additional half-acre property, but basically the same circulation system wrapping around the site, and then townhouses in the front of it facing Main Street, and then the larger stacked flats and apartment buildings in the rear. So this really has a diversity of housing styles, and when you want to go from 1-bedroom units to 3-bedroom units, it gives you a lot of different possibilities. So you could have the larger units in the townhouses, smaller units in the upper floors of the apartments, and so on. So again, this is sort of a mix of numbers where we have 2 sort of essentially duplex units, fourplex units, an 8-unit stacked flats, an 18-unit apartment, and a 24-unit apartment. But again, one of the principles, again, that we'd hope would be part of the RFP is that to maximize the amount of pedestrian space, to get the parking to the side and the rear, where it's less visible from Main Street and surrounding neighborhood, to use green buffers around the entire property, to maintain as much possible of existing vegetation, to take advantage of existing vegetation on the site, to create sort of pocket parks. So there's like a big fir tree here on the property now. So one idea was let's protect that as a little park. That could be a focus of the development. And then to, replant everything with lots of beautiful trees and lawns and sidewalks that connect not just to each home, but to other parts of the neighborhood. So it really feels like a shared community and not just a townhouse next to a parking lot. So this is sort of what the duplex style could look like. I mean, duplexes could either be side to side, like this example with a shared porch, or this one, or they could be front and rear, like this old farmhouse. And both of these, again, we're seeing more and more commonly in the marketplace. And then these are apartments. And what we want to emphasize is this is not the, the interstate shoebox apartment that just tends to look really ugly. What we're, again, trying to put into the RFP is to say, make it 2.5 stories, keep it under the 30-foot height limit, and really use the kind of design details that make it feel like it belongs in Chatham. And again, there's a lot of developers and architects that have been focusing on this in recent years. But essentially what separates an apartment from a stacked flat is, as you see here in this floor plan, each apartment has access to a central hallway, which is shared by apartments on either side. So you have a window walls, and maybe if you have a corner, you have windows on 2 sides, but most people might have opening on the central corridor and then a window wall on the outside. So again, it's bigger, sort of less windows, but it also is much less expensive to build and to live than either a stacked flat or a townhouse. So really, again, one of the principles we're recommending here and that we've been testing is really how can we get a mix of different unit types, both to increase the visual variety of this place, so it's not just a bunch of barrack buildings lined up in a row, but also to increase the kind of economic and cultural variety, so it accommodates different peoples at different stages of their life, different price points, and so on. All while sort of having a coherent kind of architectural standard that fits with across all those different building types to pull the whole thing together. So this again is that combination of 60 homes within a variety of different building types. One of the questions we had is what's the lot coverage of this at this kind of 17 unit acre density. So the total lot is 2.95 acres. This is, if you add up all the building footprints, which is the area of earth that the buildings cover, that's about 25,000 square feet, or about 19% of the site. If you take the driveways and parking areas together, that's about 36,000 square feet. And then the pedestrian space, which is everything else, is over 50% of the site. Even at this density, if it's carefully designed, we can have that contiguous buffer. We can have a nice series of spaces within the property that people can use. We can have private spaces at the entrance and the back deck of each of the units and so on. So there's a lot of possibilities, but a lot of this is driven by, again, keeping that parking as minimal as possible around the outside. And the way we do that is by all of this parking sort of shares that access road. So the road itself really is part of the parking system. It's not a separate road and then a parking lot. It's all placed as efficiently as possible around the site, and then everything within that then can be pedestrian oriented. And this is a quick sketch of what that might look like. So again, along Main Street, we have sort of traditional more traditional single-family looking homes where you have, these might be these are duplexes here, this is a fourplex, but what you see from the street are single entrances, attractive porches, a nicely planted streetscape with new trees, and then connections along the side for pedestrians to get into the interior, and then you have the larger stacked flat or apartment buildings in the back, but again, sharing that same architectural vocabulary, sharing the same access to open space, and then the parking around the edges with a planted buffer to help screen it from the neighborhood. So in the Meeting House Road property, similar ideas. Again, we started with the property in red. We looked at a number of different alternatives ranging from 25 to 50 units, including cottages, townhouses, and stacked flats and apartments. And again, what we learned is that most people weren't really that comfortable with having a single parking lot that you would have to walk through. People really wanted to have a mix of different unit types, again, to have more architectural and economic diversity. And so as we move forward, we really looked at how can we get a mix of units to keep the development back from the road, to, again, have some respect for the surrounding neighborhood, and then get a high enough density to really make it meaningful in terms of affordability. One of the things which also came up is that there's an existing access road through the site which provides access to these two neighboring properties. So that created some interesting design questions of how do we, if we're going to create a new road to access the back of this property, how does that interrelate with the existing driveway to these two properties? And it's shown a little more clearly here, where you can see in green the property boundary of the site which the town owns, and then the old Meeting House Road, I guess, goes through the site, and then one of the driveways actually is on the town property. And the desire is to change that as little as possible, and if possible, improve access to those two neighboring houses at the same time as we're creating a new access into the development site. So this is an aerial photograph showing that site, again, with the context, which is really interesting. I mean, there's the conservation area to the west. This is the bike path. There's Meeting House Road, the church, and then, this industrial area across the street, and then a mix of residential units, primarily on the north and the west. So again, we're trying to figure out how can we develop this at high enough density to be meaningful, but also respect the neighborhood in terms of visual impacts and other concerns. This is looking a little closer. Again, you can't really see it from the air or from the road, but there's that kind of a shallow ravine that runs across the front of the site. And so our new entrance road, we figured, would cross basically across the street from the entrance to the church, go across that ravine, and then provide access to the knoll on the back of the site. So this is the plan as currently configured. Again, this is, if I can find my cursor, this is the existing entrance to the church. So we're lining up the new entrance across from that. It crosses that ravine. You see here the dashed line is that old road bed. This is the existing access to that abutting house. So the idea would be to reorient that driveway, or it could be done by keeping the existing driveway and then have access to the new development through a road that reaches, again, kind of an exterior combination of a road and parking area that could extend across the rear of the site with an unpaved connection, so that if there was an emergency, you could drive across, say, a reinforced grass roadway that could be kept open, but otherwise could be used by the residents of the new neighborhood. So what we're trying to do is get a diversity of different building types. This includes 10 units in townhouses that would be along the front of the site, and these would be set into that bank that runs down into that ravine. So they might have a walkout basement on the lower side, and on the upper side, they would face sidewalk, planted, landscaped area in the parking area. And then in the center of the site, we'd have the larger stacked flat units. And again, these would be 2.5 stories, could be done within the 30-foot height limit. These ones would have 2 units on each floor, so 6 units total. These ones would be 9 units total. And so basically a total of 40 homes. So 40 seemed to be a pretty good balance between originally we were looking at between 25 and 50 units on this site. 50 seemed to be especially causing a lot more parking or requiring a lot more parking than really seemed like it could fit very well. But 40 seems to be, in my mind, fairly comfortable. And again, 50% 1 bedroom, 50% 2 and 3 bedrooms, and a combination of different unit types to provide some variety. In terms of lot coverage, it's 3.57 acres, about 22,000 square feet of buildings. So it's a larger lot, so that's only about 14% lot coverage by buildings, 5,000 square feet of driveway and parking area, which is about 16.4%, and 69% of the site could remain as either undisturbed open space or re-landscaped pedestrian space. And here's another quick sketch of how that might appear. And so this is, again, these sort of townhouse structures sort of set into a slope, trying to preserve the green space along the street. So you would see the site from the entrance road. Otherwise, it would be much as it is now, where it's basically a wall of trees. Would preserve the views into that ravine, which are visible both from the road and from the adjoining bike path, which is over here. And then once you get into this site, there's easy parking adjacent to the homes around this loop road. And then by putting the parking on the outside, you can get a continuous sort of pedestrian space, which can be landscaped as a shared public park in the center of the property. And just quickly, we did look at, getting the access road across that ravine area. All the grading can be done in a variety of ways. Probably would be a combination of slope and retaining walls with a culvert for drainage, but it could be done in many different ways, and it's feasible. So that's the presentation. At this point, we would be happy to take any questions or comments, and we'll leave it to you, Mr. Chairman.
So thank you very much. And I'll just say it is open for questions. We have 2 places where you can ask your questions. There's a microphone in the middle of the room here, and you can step up to the podium and do it there. And we just ask that you please identify yourself by name and residence. And we'll try, I'm not big on hard and fast, but try to confine your questions / remarks, whatever, to 5 minutes. And hopefully we can just do that by sort of agreement as opposed to anything more rigid. So with that, I will invite people to ask questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you want me to leave these up here on the screen, or?
Yeah, that, for the time being anyway, yes.
Yes, Pat Freeland, Horizon Drive. I have a question. What drove the decision to switch to less attainable housing on the Buckley property from the original 50-50 to 70-30?
I'll answer that question. When the opportunity came up to purchase the last piece, the last quarter, the issue was, do we use Affordable Housing Trust funds or do we use town free cash funds? If we were going to do it with town funds, we would have had to go to town meeting and in essence, wait until after town meeting. There was an interest and indeed some sense that perhaps the family would go to the to the market if we didn't work with Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So that's the reason. Yes, ma'am.
Nancy Fields, Morton Road, South Chatham. I'm interested in the density in the two properties is significantly different. And in fact, in the Meeting House Road property, it seems to be half of the density on the Main Street property, and I'm just interested why that difference.
Peter, do you want to address that?
Well, I think the short answer is the Meeting House Road property is much more topographically challenged. There's that big dip, and to get up to the part that's really developable, you have to go over that space, and probably not wetlands there. It's pretty well drained, but it would be a pain to try to. You'd have to take all those trees out and sort of fill it to develop close to the road. So I think the idea was pretty early on to really take advantage of the back of the site where you have this nice open knoll. Not open, it's got trees on it, but it's flatter. And to have, instead of to spread the buildings all over the site, have somewhat larger buildings on the back of the site where they wouldn't be seen so much. I think also in terms of the circulation, we tried to run a loop road in some of the scenarios. And in that case, you would have to have two entrances, which would be very expensive to get across that ravine, which gets steeper and bigger as you go to the south. I don't know if you've seen it from the bike trail. There's a really deep, like a 15-foot swale there. So it's easier on the north end. So I think all of that, in addition to the character of the neighborhood, I think was a consideration early on, is that probably to help it fit into somewhat more rural conditions, we didn't want to pack it as much with development as you could if you were really trying to maximize it.
Thank you. I should have mentioned at the outset, I'm hoping that we can have this presentation as on our website or the page, the Affordable Housing Trust page on the Chatham website, so it'll be available to everybody that wants to look at it afterwards. And we've received a number of comments in writing, which will be made a part of the record of this meeting. So they'll all be available for the trust to, for the board to take into account. Yes, sir, in the back.
Good evening. I'm Bill Bogdanovich. I am the president and CEO of Broadreach Healthcare. We're at Liberty Commons in the Victorian and Broadreach Hospice here in town. We have 300 plus employees all working here. And my point in standing before you tonight, first and foremost, is to commend the work that's gone into this. It's very clear to see that a lot of careful thought has been given, and to underscore in a very real way the need, just in case there is any uncertainty as to whether that's the case. About 5 years ago, we recognized housing as an ever-increasing barrier to the ability to retain and recruit frontline employees. And when I speak of them, I'm talking about nurses and social workers and certified nursing assistants and food and beverage and housekeeping staff and such. And by virtue of sometimes just having the right conversation at the right time over the last 5 years, we've been able to acquire housing ranging from shared house to 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, primarily in Chatham, although some in Brewster and Dennis as well, for about 25 staff members. So we're approaching 10% capacity, if you will, and I'll tell you that it makes a tremendous difference in our organization in Chatham. I'll speak from another context in which I spend an increasing amount of time, and that is as the board chair for housing assistance, where we're working on issues of affordable and attainable housing across the Cape. And I'm not speaking for HAC here, but I can tell you from the knowledge I've gained in that work that the severity of this issue is only growing. And it's not about whether there will be an ability of your favorite restaurant to be open as many days as you might prefer, to have all the tables open, but it can now become a matter of, if you're in the emergency room, whether there's an ultrasound tech who can help make sure all the diagnostics that you need to be worked up happen. So it's real in a very different way. It's our frontline caregiving staff, it's our teachers, it's our firefighters, it's our public safety people. So thank you for your support of this. I would urge you to give it all the careful thought it needs, but not to let perfection be the enemy of good in getting it done, because there's not time to wait. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those comments. Yes, yes, ma'am.
My name is Cynthia Stead. I work at Catholic Charities of Hyannis, and my job there is to be a housing navigator and a disability facilitator. And I'm here to ask you to consider changing some of this to make those two problems into no problem at all. Just in this past census, the town of Chatham surpassed Orleans as the oldest, the highest percentage of people over age 65. We're more than double the state median in that area. That's who lives here and who will continue to live here. I would like to advocate for the concept of universal design. Universal design is not the idea that you have a set-aside for somebody who has difficulty walking. You make every unit compatible for those that both have mobility or other disabilities, and for people who don't even notice it. You put grab bars in every bathroom. If you don't yet need them, they make lovely towel racks. You make the interior doors 36 inches wide instead of 34 inches wide. As you walk through it, you don't even notice, but it's a godsend for somebody who has a walker or a wheelchair. If you have a cabinet with storage, you make them so that they're drawers that pull out so that a person who has mobility difficulties can reach in and get what they want. I have those in my own kitchen, and I didn't even realize because it's just so much easier. A lot of small things like this, and I will give this to the gentleman, these are different pieces of the entire concept of universal design. It's time that we stopped segregating people with disabilities of any kind. We need to make all of our new housing fit this model. For whatever reason, the sun has risen or the doom has cracked, but we are going to be indulging in an orgy of building all across Cape Cod. We have a chance here to make a generational change in our housing. People who right now are struggling to get back up to the second floor might like to come and live in one of these units. A couple of years ago, I spoke in Brewster about ADUs, and one lady there raised her hand and said, is there any reason why I couldn't live in the ADU and rent out the house? And maybe that would work for the young nurse that Mr. Bogdanovich wants to hire, along with her kids and her husband. And I do need to thank Mr. Bogdanovich because I recently had my knee replaced, and I was able to get into Liberty Commons to do that. And you know what? Everybody there was terrific, but if we don't have people like Mike to run that place, It's not going to be any good having the greatest physical therapists in the world because we're not going to be able to get there, we're not going to be able to get away. It isn't the way we're used to thinking about housing, but it doesn't cost any more. Any kinds of things like to buy those grab bars. There are state grants and municipal grants and even some grants from the local CPCs that can do this, that could make the difference in the cost. Every elected official I've talked to has said, we need to pass a law. Well, no, we don't. We have one. It's called the ADA. We just don't bother to enforce it. Every builder I've talked to has said, you put it in the RFP and we can build it. And that was why I wanted to try to get here tonight before you do issue your RFP. Please consider making it compatible with this. It's important. It's something that will haunt all of us sooner or later. And again, you have a chance to make Chatham a welcoming community for all of its residents, regardless of age or disability or any of the other things that might come into play. Right now, the legally deaf need a fire alarm that both makes a sound and flashes a light in case they can't hear it. There is no reason why you can't put a fire alarm like that into every unit so that somebody who's deaf doesn't have to wait for somebody else who's deaf to die so they can move in. They cost the same. And again, it does not impinge on people with normal abilities, and it is a godsend to everybody else. I truly, truly beg of you to include this in your RFP because builders are smart and they know what they're doing and they're able to do this, and it's something that we need to do for all of our friends and all of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very appealing. You will give those to Peter? Good. Those may be new to us. I don't know if they are. They are to me, but maybe not some of my colleagues, but obviously very appealing. I don't see any hands right now, so maybe it's a good time to go to, if I may, I'm going to go to we'll get some online so they don't feel left out. I don't know if you can identify them, Gloria, but I see a hand that is identified to us as LP. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, that would be me, Larry Palmerton, and I live a couple blocks south of the 155 Main Street development area. And I really have a number of comments for consideration. And my concern is that, it was stated up front that this is the final opportunity for the community to comment. And if that's the case, then, I think we all need to kind of spill our guts here and get all the comments out. So let me just read through a list, and hopefully they get included in, future considerations by the committee in the development plans. One comment that I considered is really where I started was how much space is there in the traffic pattern for delivery trucks, moving trucks. We're talking about 50 units in that particular area, and there'll be a fair amount of people moving in and out, I would assume, over time. Delivery trucks, UPS, FedEx, and so forth, and even buses. If we're talking about families living in this area, we need to have room for, I assume, buses or a bus stop on Route 28. So these are some of the sort of types of things that I encourage us to think about besides just the physical development of the buildings themselves and their layout. I'm also a little concerned in that layout about, some of the buildings. If somebody's moving, the buildings in the middle would have, a fairly long walk for people carrying a sofa or something. I assume these are not furnished units, and hopefully, there's some limited access so that somebody isn't able to drive their moving truck up into the middle of the development and ruin any grass or vegetation that's planted. I just think we need to think about those things beyond the buildings themselves. I also had a question whether there's bike racks planned, and how mail and packages would be received in the units. You know, are there, is there a mass of mailboxes planned someplace, and how are packages delivered? And increasingly, I think we all, have an array of boxes and packages delivered to us on an ongoing basis. Also, on the traffic pattern, I'm wondering, is that like a one-way loop around the 155 property? Or, my concern is how does someone make a left turn out of there just in front of that, the Rotary by Dunkin' Donuts? Particularly at rush hour and maybe in the summer when traffic is at its peak. We need to think about how that's going to work. And lastly, there's a number of grassy areas in both developments. I applaud that. But I have trouble keeping grass growing without being irrigated at my property. So are these areas going to be irrigated? And how are we going to, keep them really looking top-notch, up to snuff on a long-term basis? What's the management plan for the units on a long-term basis? Is there an on-site manager? Are there rules and regulations for moving in and out again, and so forth? So I think that covers most of my questions, comments, and if anybody can respond to them here, that's great. If not, hopefully the committee will incorporate those comments into their future planning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are largely going to be things that fall in or get taken up as the development process proceeds. One of the first ones you mentioned, I think, would be among other things, a fire department question. I don't know whether, Peter, you want to comment about any of those, but obviously those are all good thoughts and things that we'll have to, figure out before we get to the end.
Yeah, having talked to a lot of fire departments, fire chiefs, and gotten beaten up when I didn't provide good access, I'm very sensitive to that. All these roads on the plans are drawn at either 22 feet if it's just an entry road, or 24 feet if it's adjacent to parking spaces. So that allows for two-way traffic. It allows, we haven't done a engineering software auto turn analysis for fire trucks, but all of the radiuses along the roadways, I believe, are big enough to accommodate any of the fire trucks that would have to get through there. There's one of the advantages of having a continuous loop roads, either here, which would part of it could be grass, or at the Main Street property where it would loop entirely around the site, that it does provide an alternative route if one of those routes is blocked for emergency services to get in and out, provides an alternative path for people just driving into their homes, so everybody doesn't have to go around the whole loop if you live right next to one of those entrances. And also in terms of, I think the other question was deliveries and moving. By having the parking on one side, you provide plenty of room for people to access the parking, but also to pull up a van on the opposite side of the street temporarily to drop something off for someone to be moving in. And I believe one of the concerns we got about some of the earlier designs was that some of the houses were quite far away from the parking lot. So again, by having these loop roads, pretty much every house is adjacent to one of the roadways, which is helpful both for emergency services and for moving and just practical matters, getting groceries into the house. You're still not parking in your own garage, but it is affordable housing, so you wouldn't expect to have that much convenience. So we're trying to find a balance again, and I think that's possible. But ultimately, a lot of these questions would be resolved by the developer's proposals, and you can put that in the RFP. Show us how you're going to get emergency access, show us how you're going to get deliveries and so on.
Yeah, and just the one thing I'll
One
add
final
to that.
point. Do I still have the mic?
And no. I'm just going to add
It's very
to,
quick.
well,
I
right.
would encourage there be a
15 seconds.
crosswalk,
Sorry?
a crosswalk added at the development to be able to get to the sidewalk on the opposite side of 28.
Got it. Thank you. One of the big advantages of getting that last quarter piece of the property is the second curb cut, which really does give us a lot more flexibility than we had before. I'll go to one more online. I see an E. I suspect that might be Ms. Gibbs, but if I'm wrong, whoever is identified as E has his hand up, her hand up.
I think it's me, Elaine
Oh,
Gibbs.
it's you. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Just a few things off the top. At the beginning, you said that it would be 70% affordable and 30% attainable at the Buckley property. I think there's a tremendous need in Chatham to have moderately priced, not necessarily market rate, but moderately priced homes for senior people who live in Chatham who are wanting to downsize. Or they have to because expenses in town are getting too high. So I'm wondering, one of the questions is there any reason why part of these apartments could be market rate apartments for that demographic? I'm very concerned that having 50% one bedrooms based on a survey that was done primarily answered by people in town may be skewing the results. We've also said we want to become a full-time community and welcome families into the town so we can sustain our school system, including particularly the elementary school. And yet I don't see this development doing that. I think it's too crowded. If I did my numbers correctly, if based on bedrooms, there could be well over 200 people living in this one complex. And I just don't think that's conducive to families. I know that there seems to be green space, but it seems to me that the quality of life for the people that are going to be living there, it's not just a place to sleep, it's a place to live, it's a place for the children to play with a playground, with their own family patios where they can barbecue. The perimeter parking, I think, is very difficult for a mother with her 2 or 3 kids trying to get the groceries in and having to walk in a snowstorm to get to one of the interior apartments and go up a flight of stairs to get to, one of the units that might be in a stack. I think it has to be more like a home. It's a place. It seems like you're jamming too many people in here, and I don't think the quality of life is appropriate. I think Chatham can do better than that. So I would hope that you would look into that and determine it, because it's sounding more like it's becoming just workforce housing. And which leads me to another question. I know you're saying that they're going to be year-round, but I also know that's been an issue as to how you can actually enforce that. There's a situation where you might be able to say 181 days. I would be very concerned that some of these apartments will be rented out, but they will be seasonal workforce, and those people will go away and they will get sublet or be empty for the winter. And I think that's what we absolutely don't want to have happen. We want a full-time community. We want people living and working here. I also think to restrict parking to some units to only 1 car, my expectation would be if there's 2 people in a 1-bedroom that they both work, and or in a 2-bedroom where they have a child. They have to go to the doctor, they have to go food shopping, they have to do all the normal things people do, medical appointments. And one of the consultants that was in your meeting a couple weeks ago said, oh, well, they don't need cars, they can use bikes or public transportation. I think that is presumptuous, and I think it's wrong to assume that that's all that people would expect out of this development, that people should have room for their cars. They should not be expected to take a public bus to go food shopping. So I would hope that you reduce the number of units so that you can expand the amenities within the development for people, and so that they would be there over the long term and become active members of the community, not just people who may come and go. You know, we want them to stay. And the other thing is you got to look at traffic. The planning board was supposed to look at traffic, but they excluded the Buckley property from it, and so no traffic studies have been done. If you have that many cars there going out 3 or 4 times a day, that's a major issue that has to be dealt with. So those are my comments off the top of my head right now. I'm sure there will be more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Ms. Timpson, would you like to speak?
Very brief. Ann Timpson, Chatham. This has been a very interesting hearing, and I think a lot of information has come to us both from Barrett and from the audience. But do you have, as boards, do you have goals for what you're hoping you can rent these different units for? Do you have an idea of your ceilings? I mean, are they going to be $1,500 a month? What are you working towards? Because the affordable and the attainable, I understand the limits for lottery, but the question is, the last evaluation of one unit, and I understand if they're separate, they're more, and if they're enclosed in an apartment building, they're less, but the approximation was $730,000 would be just the cost. So what I'm asking is, do you have in your mind's eye an idea? What is your goal for what the rental will be? Because I'm getting the impression from everything that has been said that 90% of these will be rentals rather than sales. And the other question is, if you have been talking through this RFI, please share the information, because you must be getting some feedback on the economics from the developers that you've spoken to. So I'm sure that our taxpayers want to know. The only other thing is, the Chronicle today had an interesting article telling us how many hundreds of thousands of dollars are going out to other towns or to a cooperative in the efforts to get more affordable housing, not necessarily in Chatham, but somewhere else. Now that you have spent over $2 million buying property and are seeking more, maybe it's time not to gift those hundreds and to keep them in this town so we can make use of them. Because in all the meetings that I've listened to, it does sound as if local support in terms of subsidies may be requested by developers down the road. So, a few questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And those are good questions, but I think I'll just say they're on our minds and leave it at that for the moment. We appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Am I on?
No, I called on a gentleman here in the room. I don't know who I am is, but I'm going to repeat the request to those of you who are online. Please turn off your cameras until you're called on.
Brian Ritchie, Chatham resident. I'd like to compliment the two speakers that just spoke a moment ago with regards to a question: what is the profile of affordable and attainable? There is the financial aspect of that, clearly, but what's the profile of the individual? What's the profile of the family? What is it comprised of? Is it a single individual? Is it a married couple with family? And the reason I bring that question up is because of 2 points I saw. Number one, 1.5 parking spaces per unit, as someone else mentioned. I think that that's going to be a problem, because most people, I do a lot of work for Habitat and worked on the Howard project, and every one of the houses there, the people had 2 cars to get to work. Maybe that's not the standard, but certainly in my experience in doing Habitat work, it has been. The second thing that I look at is the one-bedroom unit seems to be a much larger percentage than I perceived it was going to be based on the two previous meetings we had. So something must have changed to make people feel that we need more one-bedroom units than we thought we were going to need in the prior two meetings. And I was curious as to what has changed to make that percentage go up.
Gloria, do you want to just briefly speak to the one-bedroom thing? And your other comments are welcome, and thank you for those as well.
Sure. We initiated some research on, and Alexis alluded to it, on all of the affordable housing projects in the Lower and Outer Cape that have been done since the pandemic. So things that have been tenanted up in the last 4 years. We got the information from the folks who did the lottery for that and broke it down into number of one bedrooms, number of two bedrooms, number of three bedrooms, and how many applicants for each. And across the board, say there were like 10 one bedrooms, there were like 100 applicants. If there were 10 two bedrooms, there were like 20 applicants. So it was so disproportionate, the number of applicants for one bedrooms versus any others. It was undeniable. And then we also have other information from towns that have three-bedroom affordable units that have gone unfilled for over 6 months because they can't find people to take those three-bedroom units at this point. So there's definitely like an actual shift. It's not anecdotal. It's actually numbers and research that we did to come up with that. And we're going to tease that information out a little bit more over the next 6 to 8 months while we're doing our housing needs assessment and housing production plan update. We just hired consultants to do that. They're doing their kickoff workshop with the Affordable Housing Trust at their meeting on January 24th, so it's right around the corner next week. And we're going to be looking more in depth into that particular need, the number of bedrooms, and all of those other things that are going to go into creating our housing production plan, which will inform future housing projects that we do.
So, and let me just say, repeat, January 24, we have a kickoff sort of introductory meeting with the consultants that are going to help us with the housing production plan update from 2018. You're all welcome. You can come and fire a few questions there as well. So on the subject of the sort of things that you were asking, sir. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Hicks, I think, yes?
Thank you. I'm sorry, you know my name. I look like I'm going to take a long time, but I'm not. Gloria Hicks, 95 Meeting House Road. I live one house over from this complex. And I just have a few things. It's been a very long and arduous year for all of us, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of angst for some of us that live this close. The other thing is everybody's watching how these things fall as well. So this is going to set the stage for future projects. So I just, that being said, I'm disappointed not to see the cottages. I knew that was a long shot. I'm not a fan of the super high stackables. The corner building here, closest to the Baker property, is probably the most offensive, and it's going to be offensive to not only the Bakers but myself. That the rest of it, I guess, is offset enough that it gives a little bit more of a buffer for privacy for us and less of an impact. The two properties are very different. This is very residential for anybody that hasn't seen it. And I got just a bunch. My main concern now is my access to my home. I am not sorry to see this easement go. It is the old Route 137, why it wasn't dealt with way back in the day. It was an oversight and it is a flaw. I asked a couple of months ago for my own driveway, just like every other driveway on Meeting House Road, just like the complex that you're putting in. I have personally put in a couple of $1,000s in repairs, which is just futile on this access road. It's a sinkhole right where your entry to the complex is going. I'm asking for my own driveway because it's difficult now there's only the two of us, but there's a lot to navigate on that road. If Megan is waiting to pick up her son in her car, then I go the other way. But if I'm coming in, then she has to back up. If I'm backing up and Corey's coming out, it's a close call. It's dangerous as it is now. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I just want my own driveway like everybody else. It also provides a little bit more privacy between the Bakers and I, and between the Bakers and this complex. I don't know what the plan, was, for that area, and certainly the way that the driveway is for the Bakers now, I mean, they could have a straight shot out. It's not that much of a revision that I'm asking for. So, I'm asking I just want a gravel driveway out to 137 like everybody else. The other thing is, and I don't know if this is probably the time and place. Route 137 is an incredibly dangerous road. The police details and patrols are constantly on that road. We don't even have a sidewalk. You've got all of these people living here. You've got the Bakers, you've got me, you've got people taking buses, you've got school buses, you've got pedestrians like me that are going to have to walk up 137 to walk my dog on the bike trail. It's a really dangerous road, and I don't know if that's something that you've considered, but the density of this is going to dictate real serious safety issues. We've got kids now on this street. So I think that's pretty much it, is my access is what I'm concerned with. And it never should have happened that way. The old 137 should have been filled in. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm moved to make a whole bunch of comments. I just want to say this is a representative group here with community interests in mind. There are a lot of community interests. A lot of people have different opinions, but we appreciate your input, and we will continue to appreciate it. So thank you. Yeah, Ella, please.
Good evening, Ella Levitt, 31 Barn Hill Road. I'm in a butter to the Buckley property. My comments have to do with misdirection and missed opportunity with this property. Could I please have the slide that's titled Townhouses and Stacked Flats? Was one of your first ones?
Sure. Scroll up here, if you'll permit me. You can.
Right.
So we're going to the.
It's kind of at the beginning.
This one.
Yes, that looks like it. Thank you so much. The Buckley property should be a model for all future affordable and attainable housing in Chatham, and it needs to be done right. Many residents have expressed concern over the proposed high density of 50 to 60 units on a 3-acre parcel, and also to the proposed 3-story, 1-bedroom apartment buildings and the 90-car parking lot that rivals the one at Job Lot, as well as the lack of green space. I suggest taking a look at different housing designs, 28 to 30 units maximum on a 3-acre site, a mix of small-scale apartments and townhouses with attached garages and much more green space. This plan disregards a context-sensitive approach that is appropriate for a small town and village center. This plan attempts to solve all of Chatham's housing needs that have been neglected for decades in one fell swoop. This plan does not provide for working families who have been forced out of Chatham. This plan is not the solution to Chatham's housing crisis.
Thank you. I don't see anybody here. Online, I see a hand up with the initials RM.
Yep, I'm Roland Martin. I'm a homeowner on Old Village Road, which is behind the Meeting House Road proposed development. just a couple of points. The first one is the sketches don't include any kind of tree buffers behind, and you got to remember we're back there. so me and my fellow neighbors, we'd like a little buffer between us and the new development. So if you could please add in some, there's plenty of trees there. That's all it is trees. Just leave a few for us. The other thing is when we took the survey, I swear we all like what the last woman said, less density. I think we were favoring 25 units, way over 50 units. And now I'm seeing 40 units. Well, to me, 40 is a lot closer to 50 than 25. And I think it's too dense, and it's just not going to fit with Chatham. It's going to wreck our appeal. I think the same thing what the last woman said about the Main Street property, that we're trying to get too much on too little land. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I see another hand up, GF online.
Hi, I guess that's me.
Oh,
I'm
Ms.
Gloria
Freeman, I'm sorry, I should have known that. Hello.
Hi. I'm going to limit my comments tonight because I believe that townspeople will reject the kind of density that has been talked about tonight and has been discussed at the Affordable Housing Trust meetings. But I hope someone will answer this question for me, will these plans come to town meeting? Intentions are not more important than the results of the policies and plans you implement. Townspeople have had a long and vigorous history of seeking to protect its special identity through preservation and protections of quality of life issues. No doubt, everyone has the best intentions, but it's the result that counts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, please. Frank, sorry. Maybe we can get a comment in while you're walking.
My heart was throbbing when the young lady there talked about accessibility. You know, you never think about it, but all of a sudden it happens.
Is that it?
I just shared a copy, hi, excuse me, Frank Messina, South Chatham. I just shared a copy of a book that the Historical Commission, we put it together in 2007, A Sense of Place, Chatham, Chatham by the Sea, a legacy of Chatham historic homes. I'll be happy to make additional copies available to the members of the committee, but I'm sure most of you have seen it. I was involved with affordable housing in the 70s in my other life back in Bergen County, New Jersey. I think I spent 10 years on an affordable housing committee constructing affordable housing back in northern New Jersey. And back then, we were able to get a lot of federal funding to pay for a lot of it. I don't know if that exists for us today. I think probably the throttle has been closed, and that kind of funding is not available, you know, for us, although there might be some other funding available. I don't want to be a wiseacre, but it's just too many units in too little space. The density, if you were to have to go forward with this to the zoning board or the planning board, you're not going to go very far. So I assume this is going to be a 40B. I guess you guys call it a friendly 40B, but I don't know how friendly it's going to be. I think Gloria talked about town meeting voting, but I think if I understand the process, we're kind of out of it already. You guys have been given the charter, and you're going to go ahead. I don't want to say you're going to do what you want to do, but there's a lot to be said about the density. I think, quite candidly, what you've done in South Chatham, and you're to be applauded. You've done a lot of hard work, and you did a lot of work. I think it's pretty good. Maybe, if I recall, excuse me, if I recall, it was going to be something like 30 or 40 units in South Chatham, was it?
You're talking about Meeting House Road.
Meeting House Road, yeah.
Yeah.
That's South Chatham, okay? Speaking of South Chatham for a second, the woman who's in butter nearby talked about this, the safety. Route 37, Route 28 interchange is terrible. South Chatham Village Association, which I am a member of, the director on the board, we lobbied the town and we lobbied the state, and we finally got a crosswalk on 28 to move, because there were young people going to the bike path and there was no way to get through it. So it's going to be even worse. I tried about 5 or 6 months ago to get a sidewalk to be put along 137 when they were repaving it, but unfortunately the RFP has already gone out. So when you do the work on that site, you've got to think about a lot of the infrastructure as it relates to the access to the bike path and to the sidewalk. You know, we have a unique thing in South Chatham. The sidewalk in the rest of Chatham is on the north side. When you reach 137, it switches to the south side. But there's no way to go from one to the other without a crosswalk. So there's work that needs to be done, a lot of work. So there's a cost involved with that work. I was also indicate your comment about the fire department and access, but I'm sure you're going to go through that. Chatham's fire department, they're a tough crew to get it to be meeting all the requirements. But I think, so I'm pretty comfortable with what you're doing in South Chatham. I mean, you know, I think you got to cut it back a bit. I think, as the individuals indicated, that one multi-story structure you have right at the entrance is probably a bit too much, you know, for the people. Don't want to see it. West Chatham, completely other story. I think you're trying to squeeze too much into a small space. I think it's been said already a couple of times, you can't solve the problem. This problem started about 30, 40 years ago, and unfortunately, the select board, the board of selectmen, whatever we called them, were missing the boat. And we had so many opportunities to buy land, and we didn't. And here we are trying to solve a regional problem in Chatham. There ain't no land, okay? I happen to be chairman of the planning board. When I went on it about 20 years ago, we would get one application a month, maybe, for a tear down, for a demo. In 2023, we had 63 applications, 63, for demolition and major modifications. Chatham is changing, but you guys are hitting the gas pedal here. You gotta slow down just a little too much. I think we can make a great contribution. I think people of Chatham were happy to spend the money, you know, the $2 or $3 million we are. But I think you want to get the town of Chatham, the people of Chatham, to accept this. And again, congratulations for all your hard work. Been there, know what you're going through. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Carol Gordon from South Chatham, and I'm happy this presentation will be on the website because, as you know, in January, lots of times people are away, so at least now they can see it on the website and be informed. That's good. And I also think that so many issues have been addressed tonight, but also we need to keep in mind if we're building a community, there's going to be children. We have from even a 1-bedroom to the 3-bedroom, and they need a play area, and they need it on both Meeting House Road and Main Street. So I think that green space is very important, but enough space so that they can play, that they have a safe area to play. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Corey Baker, the 87 Meeting House Road, the direct abutter to the Meeting House Road property. My first concern, obviously, is I guess it would be the townhouse, the large townhouse that would be basically overlooking my small cottage. It's very close to my house. I don't understand exactly what type of vegetation is going to be planted in between. I mean, are we going to put in a couple, like cypress trees and hope they grow one day? Or, what is the exact plan of that? As it stands now, I understand that my driveway is currently on part of your property, which I didn't know about that until surveyors started coming through my yard when this purchase was originally done. I've been there for 14 years. Previous to that, Edwin Jepson lived there, but in between him and I, it was abandoned for 7. So I know that driveway has been in there for well over 20 years. I'm working on trying to figure out the documents for that. It's been proven to be very difficult to find when somebody laid some cement down to a house some time ago. Also concerned too, I have 2 smaller children. We currently use that driveway, what was the former 137, to go to the bike trail every day. We go literally daily, unless it's really bad out. We go and get exercise, get the kids out. I have a 15-month-old and a 5-year-old. And to now have to go around 150 or 200 people to an already dangerous intersection. I mean, it's not that far. It's from me to you guys, from the end of that driveway to the bike trail. And it can be scary at times. People are flying, bikes are going by. Most bikers don't even stop. So then you have it's a mess as it is. And then add that in between, how are we going to be able to go about that? So yeah, the density of that, I guess the townhouse or whatever it is that is closest to my property, that is overlooking my house, is a concern. What would be the vegetation in between it? And then another concern is like on a point of, like mailboxes and things like that. Where is their trash going to go? Where are their dumpsters going to be located? Are they going to be on my side of the property? Or are they going to be, where would they be located? How is that trash going to be taken care of and such? I mean, there's like a lot of great green property and things like that are going on, but green space, on that green space, there's going to be mailboxes and dumpsters and other things that are going to go in. So how is that all going to fit in? So that's all I got. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much. All good questions. I don't see any, I'm sorry, in the back. Yes, sir.
By the way, I also would like to thank all of you. I'm Richard Kraser from Old Queen Anne Road. I'd like to thank all of you for the work that you're putting into this. It's certainly a lot here. My concern, or maybe my question, is more about how we get the mix between 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. It sounds like it was based on results from the lottery. I would think a better indication is the business community and the hires that they are trying to bring on board of what their families look like. If the lotteries are, let's say, statewide, or I don't know how far they go, they may not represent the community that's trying to move here to fill the open jobs and the positions that are necessary. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much. And I'm hopeful that we'll get as much data in hand before we make that suggestion as part of an RFP. And I would also suspect that we'll get input back from the developers making a response to the RFP, because after all, they're the ones that have the strongest economic interest in the answer to that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I see you, sir. You had spoken before. There is someone online. I suspect it's Mr. George Myers. I will call on you now, Mr. Myers, if that's you. GM is the person I'm calling on. I don't know whether that's Mr. Myers or someone else.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't click my mute button. I'm George Myers of Venice, Florida, formerly of Chatham as a resident and a summer resident. The issue of most concern for the former Buckley homestead seems to be placing 50 or 60 units on the property at a density of 17 to 20 units per acre. That density exceeds the 12 units per acre maximum for affordable housing of the planning board's proposed zoning bylaw amendment for West Chatham. After much deliberation, the planning board determined that a density of 12 units per acre for affordable housing is compatible with West Chatham Village neighborhood and a moderate density that would likely be acceptable to town meeting. Under that standard, an affordable or attainable housing project on the Buckley property should have no more than 36 units, not 50 or 60. Although a 40B affordable housing project is not bound by that 12 units per acre, a project with 40 to 70% greater density with both affordable and attainable housing is unlikely to be acceptable by most town residents, and perhaps not even by property owners who might otherwise consider offering their properties to the town for affordable housing. We should also keep in mind that compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood is a key housing concept of the Cape Cod Commission's regional housing strategy. In my view, it's just not logical that affordable and attainable housing on the Buckley property should have a 17 to 20 unit per acre density when the 100% affordable housing at Meeting House Road has an 11 unit per acre density, or even a lesser 16 unit per acre density if topography limits the buildable area, as the consultant noted. With respect to parking vehicles in the road all around the entire perimeter rather than off-street and driveways or in garages is less safe and gives the property more of a parking lot appearance, even to its residents, in comparison with a project with parking off-street, in driveways, and in garages. And I think that's probably very likely possible with only a 12 unit per acre density. And I also question the community development department's selection of one of the consultants for this project. The most qualified firm for any Cape affordable attainable housing project is perhaps Union Studio Architecture and Community Design of Providence, Rhode Island. And that was pointed out to the community development more than a year ago. A review of Union Studio's website and its extensive affordable and attainable work on the Cape will confirm its excellent qualifications for any housing project on the Cape. Barrett Planning Group partnered with Union Studio, for example, to develop the 10 to 14 unit per acre Governor Prince Inn project for Orleans. Both Union Studio staffers for that project had master's degrees in residential architecture. So I question why community development didn't partner Barrett with Union Studio rather than with Dodson. Dodson is a Western Massachusetts landscape architecture firm. And with all due respect to that firm, based on its 2024 website, Dodson has no residential architects on staff, not much affordable housing experience, and no prior housing projects on the Cape. And finally, I hope that everyone will eventually come together and achieve the best possible design for the Buckley property, consistent with the neighborhood and with Chatham's affordable and attainable housing goals. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I'm just going to make one comment about the consultants, as you put it. They've been with us for over, as Alexis described, for quite some time. I'll just express my personal opinion that the excellence of their service was demonstrated tonight. You may not agree with some of the things they've put up on the board, But in terms of communicating information and the rationale behind it and the interaction with this board over a long period of time, they have, I think, vindicated the selection of them as our partners in this project. So, and I appreciate, I have a lot of respect for Union Studio, Mr. Myers, but pardon me, but that ship has sailed at this point. Yes, sir, if you want to make a quick comment, I'm waiving the one to a customer rule here.
Thank you very much. Brian Ritchie again, Chatham. I had a question for you, Mr. Chairman. When you send out an RFP, does the RFP stipulate what it is you would like to be built, and then the people responding will say, here's how we can meet that build?
Do you want to just address that in a very general way, Gloria? Thank you.
Sure, very general and briefly. When we do the RFP, we are going to basically establish some parameters within which we want a developer to work. So we'll do a different RFP for each site. At one point, we were thinking that we were going to combine them, but they really have their own feel and needs. So we would do something like all the units have to be affordable. We would like between 25 and 50 units on the site and things like that, kind of to frame what we want.
Right.
But we would not ask for a specific project. And if we attach the development concepts that you've seen here tonight, it wouldn't be that we were saying, give us a price for this project.
Okay, the reason for my question is that's what I'm used to as well, and that sets the parameters to which they respond. Otherwise, you can't compare A's proposal to B's proposal. They don't mesh. And the reason for my question is, if we don't have the answer yet with regards to the profile of the individuals and the families, before you define the RFP, it's going to be difficult for them to respond back and you to be able to compare A to B when you see those responses, specifically looking at one-bedroom units versus 2 versus 3. Only point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Ritchie. All right, we'll waive the rule one more time here.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Carol Gordon from South Chatham. I think Gloria had asked, and I'm interested too, will the final plans go before town meeting?
No.
Yes, no? No?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No. Going once, going twice. Is there anybody else online?
Still people online.
Sorry.
Well, I'm online, but,
Phil Richardson, I understand, is on with a request. Sorry?
yeah. Well, thank you. I just wanted to give my few thoughts, because I'm on SRIC, and we've been looking at this housing situation for 3 or 4 years. I'm like some of the others that I think the approach on Meeting House is fine, but I think the approach for Main Street is dense. And the other thing is that I'm not sure who decides the mix, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, because it really decides what people live there. And I've always being in Chatham, I always hear the complaint that, well, my child can't come back to town because it's too expensive for him to buy a house, or we need children in the schools to keep the schools going, and that all speaks to family. So I think that Main Street should be more oriented to family. And I had a few exhibits. Could somebody put up my first slide?
Which was the first one, Phil? I have 3 here. There's one that says house plans, 1 model view, and 1 site plan.
Yeah, the house plans. And I can't see anything here, but I don't know why. But the house plans, oh, no, that would be the last one. Go ahead, go back. Now I can see. Go back to can you go back 2 or 3?
So to model view, all right, model views.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, just put that up. Yeah, sure. So to me, I've always thought around 10 units an acre was the proper thing, and we've shown some of this to the public in the past, and I think people like the ideas. But to me, Main Street's got to be more family oriented, and so I had my architect out here in California draw up a plan. Could you go to number 2, please? Next slide. And so there we we only had the original amount of property that Steve was going to sell. So here we have, and these are all single-family houses, cottages, and they're all around 1,200 square feet, and they can be 2, 3, or 4 bedroom, depending what you would want to have. And they do surround their own little, private open areas. They all have backyards with really nice backyards, because the present idea for Main Street has, parking all the way around the site. So it's surrounded by asphalt on 4 sides, which I don't think is necessary. I think a center road like is shown here is better, because it gets you closer to your house and it doesn't surround, you can have a backyard. This plan also included a little community center and a public garden. So I would like some consideration given to, and these are all, again, single-family houses. There's no duplexing. There is no apartment houses. So this looks like Chatham before 1950, and that's what we were aiming at in this design. So that's sort of where I'm at, and I guess that covers it. The other question I've always had is that the way we've purchased these properties seems to dictate some degree of design, and I think I asked Selectman to check this out, and I think the town attorney said that the purchase method could be, that we're not stuck with the zoning required by the purchase process. So if that complicates the design, I would love us to come up with some other means to purchase the properties, if that's possible. And so we're not restricted by that label or that constraint. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Alexis, I know you seem to want to say something. There's a gentleman, however, in the back
Fine.
who's been waiting. Please, sir.
I'm just getting ready. That's fine.
Peter Swenson from West Chatham. I own property that directly abuts the Buckley property and have known the Buckleys for a long time. The first time it was presented to me by them, it was going to be a much smaller community type of situation that they were hoping for when they, I think, presented it to the town. I would say that our objection is density, and it seems to us that the property is being overloaded. Secondly, in your discussion on parking, being in the motel business, I know what it is to have people stay with, have extra cars. Nothing was said about people, what do they do with guest parking? You've got the number of units you've got here, you're going to have people having friends down to visit, stay overnight, what happens to those? And the other thing I don't understand is the lottery. I've heard it mentioned a number of times, and I'm trying to, as Mr. Bogdanovich from Liberty Commons mentioned, he's happy to, has a place that his employees can be, but how do we know that the lottery will take care of what we're all worried about is Chatham workers or people who need workers to be, for Chatham. And I've heard a lot of complaints about the lottery, but I've never really understood it. So.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Were you wanted to make a comment?
No, I'm sorry. I was just getting the next step slide ready for when I'm not trying to.
No, please,
hog
go
this
ahead.
podium.
I actually am trying to wrap it up here. We've been at this a couple of hours. Frank, if you want to keep it short, we'll waive the rule for you as well.
Thank you.
Oh, we do? I'm sorry, yeah.
I also believe, my colleague, I think, also has her hand up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
2 quick questions. How are these properties managed? I mean, do we have now a new management company, or is the town of Chatham going to get in the hotel management business?
The town of Chatham is not going in the management business.
So this is going to be turned over, and somebody else is going to manage
Don't take that
it?
for anything more than it's worth. The town will not be in the management business.
Okay. Secondly, your comment is there will not be, other than these meetings here, that people of Chatham are not going to have any say relative to what these things look like, the density. It's going to go through zoning, but zoning, if it's a 40B, doesn't mean much. So this is it. We could be setting ourselves up for, some days in the courtroom, which means it's going to take 5 years before anything happens. So I think you've got to really seriously think about what you're doing. There's a lot of opposition to the density. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have two people online with their hands up. One may be a community member and one may be a member of the consultant team. So let me go to the community member, whichever you are. So is it JH? Okay, thanks.
Yes, good evening. John Hogan from Clearwater. I guess I've been beaten for being the furthest away. Anyway, and giving the background of being a summer resident on the Cape, but down here in Clearwater, I obviously see some of the dense things down here. And what I wanted to follow up with was the previous comments, which I agree with, was make sure you take the fire department in consideration, because there was a fire, small kitchen fire on my adjoining street a couple of years ago. There were 6 units that showed up. So, when you've got a ladder truck or tower truck in Chatham, but it needs to be able to get close to the action if there is a problem. So, these units that are sort of surrounded by grass, that's nice, but you may want to try to make sure you have some way to get access to a ladder truck or tower for these buildings, just in case. And that's what I wanted to, really emphasize, was accessibility for not just one, but maybe a half dozen fire trucks in that complex, wherever it is. So that's all. I just wanted to give you guys that background. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallgren. All right, we have two that I don't think we've called on before. SB.
She's with.
Oh,
that would be
it's
Steve.
Stephen Buckley, yes. Mr. Buckley, go ahead.
Thank you. I have one comment, but before I say that, I like the thoughtfulness that's been put into the design of these, and it's finally gotten to the point, I think, where people have something to chew on, rather than just talking about townhouses versus cottages versus stacks. They want to be able to visualize what these places might look like when they drive past them in the future, and point and say, oh, that was a good job, or maybe we should have done that better. So I appreciate the work and everything like that. But I was on the Long Range Planning Committee as a member at large in 2003, so that's over 20 years. And it's about time we revised that. It shouldn't be done every 50 years. It should be done maybe every 20. So in any event, though, taking the long term, I foresaw that our property that we sold to the town at a discount could have gotten more money on the open market, I believe. And that was mentioned earlier by the chair, yes, the idea that they wanted to jump on the property before somebody else scooped it up. I'm glad to see that the whole thing is there and has added, that last lot has made the whole property much more useful and valuable for its intended purposes. So that's great. And but having been taking the long term, I saw that property was underdeveloped. Yes, I lived on that property in the back in one of the cottages for 7 years. So, and that's actually where I drafted up, as a member of the Long Range Planning Committee, the preface for our long range plan. That's 90% me, but to talk about the quality of life in Chatham, and it's more than economic. So just because businesses would like to have workers, preferably single workers without kids to distract them from their work or take time off, I think we need to look at the big picture, the long term, and what do we need as a town, not what do the businesses want us to make for them. And so it could be, yes, but preferably, in my opinion, family-oriented. That's what I was hoping would be something along the lines of what Phil Richardson was pointing out, and did a pretty good job for an architect. His architect was from California, and it did a pretty good job of looking at something that would become a neighborhood that people would be proud of, that people would say, oh, look at that, or I live there, oh, that must be great. Oh, yeah, it's neighborly people. If you design it properly, and I've lived in many other different types of settings besides Chatham for 25 years, garden apartments, high-rises. We had townhouses as well, where we raised our kids until we moved back, and they went to junior high and high school here. So anyway, what I'm trying to get down to is that if we've been talking about this problem for a long time, another month or two, it's not going to make that much difference. And so the idea, we don't want to make this perfect. I don't want to make it perfect. I want to make it as good as we can and be able to look back and say, we took that extra time and it made all the difference as far as what we did. So let's haste can make waste, and I appreciate what's done so far, but I did not see these plans until tonight. And I'm being asked right now to respond to them and comment on them without the necessary time to make this a meaningful exercise, meaningful participation, not slapdash ad hoc. People will think of things to say after this meeting because they didn't get a chance to digest what was said tonight, answers that were tonight, and so this should have been made available. It should have been prefaced with Q&A, questions to clarify, well, is this going to happen? And what does the RFP, and what can we ask for? And those things should have been cleared up ahead of time. And then people can say, oh, well, now that I know that, I can make a comment. That's how it should have been presented. So I would say that another meeting is necessary to make this a meaningful exercise for people who have just learning about some of these things now, to be able to say, come back again before and say, well, now that I know that, these are my thoughts. And so I have along those lines, I have one thing to say that struck me in looking at this. I don't know if the RFP, if we can specify where a common green or a common area goes. I guess it would be nice to be able to say in the RFP, we would like there to be a central area where it could go, and maybe even something where you look straight down from the road and you see the manor house, the big house at the very end, where it looks like it's an estate with houses on the side, and that would allow a green area for kids to play ball, have a yard sale for people to look out and see where the kids and what's going on out there, and see this whole community be able to see stuff that's going on there, a tent, somebody has a wedding reception, whatever, things like that. And also, it would allow fire trucks to go right down the middle if they had to, so from a safety thing. But that's just one thing, and I might have other things later, but it shouldn't be all done in one meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess I have one more waiver to grant, Ms. Gibbs. So please.
It's going to be quick.
Okay, thank you.
I just need an answer to that question that I had regarding market rate apartments on the Buckley property. There is a tremendous need for housing for people who do not qualify for affordable or attainable, but they need a place to live. They can be downsizing, or they could be, two young professionals with a couple kids that don't meet those criteria and need a place to live. So if it's a private developer, can you have market rate apartments there as well as a percentage affordable and a percentage attainable? Because I'm not convinced that you would be able to fill up 60 apartments with just affordable and attainable. I don't think you could. Not with, that's a lot of units, 100 between the two properties. So yes or no, can there be market rate?
With some reluctance, I'm going to say that I don't think that we are in a position to give you a yes or no answer, but having said that, I'll ask Gloria to comment very briefly, we're just not at a position in the process to be able to give a definitive, and maybe I should ask you, Alexis, and ask you if you would address that question.
I would actually defer to staff on that because our understanding has always been that the town's wish was because it was purchased with X amount of affordable housing trust fund dollars, that amount would need to be
And
affordable.
that may ultimately be the answer, although we do recognize that there is a portion, whether it's 30 or whatever it is, somewhere plus or minus percent, that came from the town, which offers an opportunity for something above that. We're going to have to work that out in the process with the developer, I think. Do you have anything to add?
I think that sums it up. I think that up to 30% can be attainable housing, which would be anywhere between 80% AMI and 200%.
Okay. So do you want to, I am going to ask you if you'd like to wrap up, and you have a colleague online that might want to have something to say?
Oh, yes, Judy Barrett.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciated your response to Mr. Buckley's earlier comment, but as the person responsible for our contract with the town, I just want to briefly point out that we have worked with Dodson and Flinker and Union Studio both in different communities. We've not been partnered by the community in either case. It's a choice that we make. They're equally competent and qualified firms. I would only also point out that in the case of Orleans, which was mentioned for the density limit that's on that project, which is the former Governor Prince property, that was a constraint imposed by the town. It was not a recommendation of our firm or Union Studio. In either case, we would have recommended more units on that property. It was the town's decision to do otherwise. But I just need to push back on the qualifications of our subcontractor. They are every bit as qualified as Union Studio. They're just different firms, work well in different types of communities. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I appreciate that, and I'll just say we well recognize that. I think one of the virtues of the kind of community participation that we get is that everything that we do as officials is open to question and let's say revisiting, and that's just part of the program. So, but we certainly are very firmly satisfied with the work of the consultants. So thank you very much. Do you want to close from your side, and then I'll invite a motion to adjourn?
Sure, I was just going to recap the next steps. Although, am I able to get my screen up again? Thank you. So I just wanted to pull this project schedule up again. So this was the planned third community meeting. And so where that last bullet says longer term development process commences, what that looks like is the development of the RFP, which I think it sounds like the trust has some, they're taking this feedback into consideration tonight. So I just wanted to reiterate kind of what that timeline was. But also, if you're looking for kind of notifications of where this process goes next, in addition to subscribing to the main sheet newsletter, the housing page that's available online will also be providing updates. That's correct? Yes, okay, good. So just in case you're looking for next steps, if you're looking for the slides or information about subsequent opportunities for review or anything like that, just please keep an eye out there. So that is all that I just wanted to reiterate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite a motion. I'm sorry?
Not to get up and speak, was it my understanding that many letters had been written or emails?
Yes, and as I said, they will be part of the record of this meeting, and they will be attached to the minutes.
To the minutes.
Okay, I'll invite a motion to
Second.
in a second. Okay, Trustee Levitt,
Yes.
Trustee Oppenheim? Yes. Trustee McClellan?
Yes.
Trustee Davis?
Yes.
Trustee Bean?
Yes.
And Trustee Schneeberger, with apologies for the prior slip of the tongue.
Yes.
And Trustee Shell says yes. We are adjourned at 8:16 PM.